So thank you for getting it directly back into all of those deliberations again. And I'll start now in a moment. We'll get our roving mics at the ready. And just to remind everyone, we're going to take what the majority of the table have agreed on in the suggestions. And Cathal, we actually have a chair for him this time, which is great. And he'll be recording the wording as we're talking through it and discussing it. So, with no further ado, let's go to document A and to the text in red, item 10 there. There is initial wording here to be voted on, but before we do that, are there any suggested amendments to this wording? Oh, okay. Oh, hand up from table 9. Sorry, okay. So is the room happy to vote on table 10? So I'll read it all together. Ireland needs to recognise its global responsibility. Sorry. Was there a hand up there? Item 10 on the main document A. No, it's okay. So that you can read it here. Ireland needs to recognise its global responsibility, including through our local actions in terms of our consumerism, resource usage and our international biodiversity responsibilities. The Irish government should advocate for a shift in emphasis in EU and international economic policy away from GDP expansion as a goal in itself and towards the goal of societal and ecological well-being. All in favour of including this, please raise your hand. And that's a clear majority. Thank you. Okay, recommendation 11. An all-island approach and wider transboundary approach should be taken into consideration with regard to biodiversity conservation and restoration. Table 9.
We were thinking of potentially changing the word transboundary, and that we found it a little bit kind of, I don't know, maybe not self-explanatory for some people. And we thought that we might change it to the interaction with global migratory ecosystems.
So can you say that again, Louise, that you want to...
So change transboundary to...
Now, I'll tell you the argument for transboundary there was to make sure that it was transnational, not just the whole island, but also that we're including a global sense of that. With that in mind, do you still want to get rid of the transboundary? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, that's just what the table voted
Grant,
on. So
yeah.
I'm just reading it out.
Just for clarification.
Yeah, I think so, because I think, well, Hillary's not here, but she was saying the interaction with global migratory ecosystems. Do you want to explain this one?
An all-in approach and wider interaction.
Yeah, that's it.
Okay, thank you. To my mind, if we're specifying one element of the biodiversity system, it's actually negating all others. So I wouldn't highlight one specifically there. But let's take a vote on it. Tim's suggesting an all-island approach and wider interaction with global biodiversity should be taken into consideration with regards to conservation and restoration. Might that be acceptable? So I'm getting a nod from table 9 there. Mary has her hand up. Hello, Mary. Can we get a microphone to Mary? You have a mic as well.
Good morning. Sorry, my voice is yet again gone. Just for the sake of it, transboundary is a common term for anybody who's working in law and governance. So even though it mightn't be something open to the general population, it is a general term that they would know very well what it means. It is more general and all-encompassing than the proposed changes. So I wouldn't be concerned about it, is what I'm saying, and I think it is a useful term that is within that. That's about as much as my voice can do again.
Thank you, Mary. So that's a suggestion to keep it as it is, or a suggestion of changing it to say global biodiversity. So all in favour of the change, please raise your hand. Okay, so it's not carried. So transboundary will stay there. Okay, thank you. Jean, is there an issue with that? No, it's okay. Okay, grant. Okay, No, it was just negated. We're keeping the original text. Oh, sorry, and now, sorry, you're right, everyone's right, okay. And now, can we vote on this wording to be included? An all-island approach and wider transboundary approach should be taken into consideration with regard to biodiversity conservation and restoration. All in favour of including this, please raise your hand. Okay, thank you. So, 12, the government should renew and stand by its commitment to implement the objectives and targets of the EU 2030 biodiversity strategy and play a leading and supportive role in the adoption and implementation of a new EU nature restoration directive. Okay, all in favour of including this? Great, carried. Thank you very much. 13, all departments must explicitly acknowledge the government's declaration of a biodiversity emergency and take appropriate action. All in favour? Are there any wording? Sorry. Thank you. Dan, if we can get a microphone to Dan, please. And we'll go to table 1 then as well.
Table 6 of a proposed change to that. Just we thought that the wording appropriate action was a bit woolly, a bit soft. So we propose that it be changed to all departments must explicitly acknowledge the government's declaration of a biodiversity emergency and take immediate and targeted action.
Okay, thank you for that, Dan. Table 1, and then I'll go to table 9.
Yeah, we saw a problem with number 13 in that an emergency has already been declared by government, and that each emergency legislation is extremely strong legislation, and the individual departments may need to take issue with there may be issues that come up that the individual departments have to defend a certain incident on, and we just felt that seeing it's already legislation, you know, why should we just repeat it? That's really the lookout on that, and we said just remove it entirely, you know.
Okay.
And we carried it on the table.
Okay, thank you, David. So that's from yours not included in the ballot. So we will vote on the room from that, and then table 9, and then we'll go back to Mary Dobbs. No, gone. Okay, so just a microphone to Mary in the back, please.
To be fair, this time I got delegated. Just to qualify or to clarify, the recommendation doesn't state emergency legislation. It's just a simple declaration of an emergency. So it's not about creating emergency legislation. There is an important difference in that.
Thank you, Mary. Any other comments or amendments to make? Okay, so all those in favour of the changed wording to the statement to take immediate and targeted action, all those in favour of that changed wording, please raise your hand. Okay, so that wording is taken. And now voting on that recommendation 13 to be included with these recommendations from the Assembly. All in favour of including it, raise your hand. Okay, that's carried. Thank you, everyone. Okay, 18 then. In order to drastically reduce the use of pesticides by 50% by 2030, in line with EU policy, the state should incentivise and encourage the domestic and commercial use of natural, cost-friendly alternatives, sustainable practices and biodiversity-friendly solutions. It should also regulate the use of chemical pesticides and fertilisers while maintaining food security. This should coincide with the improvement of schemes for the safe disposal of unused hazardous materials as well as their containers. Now, we did discuss this in the last one, but we got proposals to include more wording on this. So, any comments on it? So we have table 3, please.
Hey, so table 4 is suggested changing where it says by 50% by 2030 to by at least 50% by 2030.
Thanks, Yves. Okay, so to include that at least 50% by 2030, all in favour of including that wording, please raise your hand. That's a majority? Okay, and all those against including it, please raise your hand. Okay, we'll carry that. Thank you, table 4. And now on including that complete wording now with this recommendation, please raise your hand if you're in favour. Okay, thank you. That's carried. Wonderful. We're flying through this. Okay, so I'll move on to S6, which is on page 4. There should be a permanent cross-party standing Oireachtas committee on biodiversity loss who will consider and respond to the recommendations of this assembly. Any suggested amendments on this? Okay, all those in favour of including this additional wording? Great, that's carried, thank you. Now, FE9 on page 5. The state should establish a framework for corporations and large businesses as major users of natural resources to provide financial contributions to fund the conservation and restoration of biodiversity. Any amendments to make to FE9? Okay, all those in favour of including that additional wording, please raise your hand. Great, that is carried, thank you. Page 7, we have communities. And we have additional wording in C2. Provide funding and infrastructural supports to local community and voluntary groups, including the settled and nomadic traveller community and other groups engaged in actions addressing biodiversity loss and restoration, e.g. managing invasive species, participating in citizen science, creating biodiverse spaces and protecting and monitoring the health of the local environment, etc. Any? Okay, so we have this table, Dan, I don't know what table number that is, sorry, 6. So we've got a microphone to table 6, please, and to table 9 after that.
Table 6, I'd like to propose a change to that to remove specific groups, so to leave it at providing funding and infrastructural supports to local community and voluntary groups engage in actions addressing biodiversity loss and restoration, e.g. managing, and leave the rest, just to take out the reference to one specific group, because it should be all groups really, shouldn't it?
Yes, but this was discussed in the last that we should reference the nomadic element of culture here. So that was discussed. We will vote on it, but I do think it's important at the same time. I take your point, we're highlighting one specific community, but I do think it's important to note that as well in the work of the Assembly, but we'll vote on that.
Yeah, it was just a view of the table, so.
Okay, thank you, Dan, for that. And then we have table 9, and was there a hand up at table 7 as well? Okay.
Yeah, the table had a conversation about that as well, and we come up with some wording that.
Do you want to stand up, Hilary?
Yeah, I can't read the computer if I stand up. Provide funding and infrastructural supports to local community and voluntary groups, traditional and new communities such as settled and nomadic communities, and other groups engaged in actions addressing biodiversity loss, etc., etc.
Okay, so hold on, give Cathal a chance there.
So provide supports to local community and voluntary groups, traditional and new communities such as settled and nomadic communities and other groups.
Okay, I think we're going to need a discussion on this. Thank you, Hilary. And then table 7.
Hi, yeah, at table 7 we just wanted to change the traveller community to including marginalised and minority communities and other groups, just because we saw singling out the traveller community as having quite negative connotations, and we'd like to kind of make it a more inclusive recommendation.
Okay, thank you. So what I'm sensing is that at the heart of all of these amendments, it's to try and make sure that we are being as inclusive as possible. So we can agree on that's the recommendation's bottom line. However, we did speak the last time about specifically noting the traveller community in it. Now, we can do that in the report, but so it's up to us now to discuss this as a room, whether that language should be here or whether we want to include it in an overall introduction. And I don't want to call on anyone as specifically representative, but I would like to ask what would be the best thing to do if we have a member from the traveller community with us to potentially speak to it. I don't want to put you on the spot though, so if you'd rather not. Oh, great. Thank you, David.
Yeah, I suppose you're, you know, we are, there is a minority of one here. So, you know, we're gonna, there is an element of the tyranny of the majority at times. That's, I'm not trying to accuse or make anybody feel that their suggestion is not valid or reasonable. What I'm really saying is that in this documentation, which is very long, there is, without that specific reference to one part of our heritage, culture, and specific community of families, there would be no reference to traveller life at all in the documentation. I think it's important to just have an acknowledgement that there has been and still is a nomadic way of life, and so it's really just to have those words in it, nomadic, you know. So for me, the second, Hillary's recommendation does it. The recommendation that was there also does it, but I can understand why including everybody in one terminology might seem like equality. However, this is about diversity or biodiversity, and you know, it is important to recognize that there is diversity that has to be acknowledged. You know, sometimes you can't just say it's all the same. So that's my contribution. You know, in the end, it's down to a vote. You know, I've done my bit. I'm happy to turn it over to the floor. You know, what people decide is what people decide. But that's my specific perspective. So there, I'll leave it with you there at that. Is that okay?
Thank you, David. Appreciate that. That's not easy. So yeah, a round of applause. That's a tricky thing to have, and this is diversity in the middle of biodiversity. I like that phrase. With that in mind, is it you think the preference is to keep in the reference specifically to traveller community as opposed to not keeping it in? That's okay. With that in mind, I'm not sure the best. I think the initial vote, let's say, will be to keep the wording as it is. Let's see what the initial numbers are on that. So is that a fair way of doing this? Yeah, okay. Grant, let's put the question up on this one. All in favour of this initial wording, please raise your hand. Okay, that's the majority of the room. Yeah, and all those against the wording, and it's not a personal, it's just against the wording, please raise your hand. Okay. So it's carried, we'll keep it as it is. Thank you for that. That's a difficult conversation to have, but I do think it's important to note our ethnic community within that specific in the language. Okay. And we'll also, reflect it in the text of the report. Thank you everyone for that. Okay, let's move on to page 8, ECA 1. It's to include the wording, the public must be encouraged to live in a way which reduces their impact on biodiversity loss. The state must develop public awareness and engagement campaigns on biodiversity and biodiversity loss to educate people on the fundamental role of biodiversity in our lives and provide resources to inform people on what they can do in their own lives to support biodiversity. Any amendments to ECA 1? Okay, all in favour of including that additional wording, please raise your hand. Thank you, that's carried. ECA 8 on page 9. Children and young people are integral to ensuring the environment is protected, in line with the national strategy, with the current national strategy on education for sustainable development. Now, Cathal, I actually have suggested additional wording in this to make sure it's coherent. So I'm suggesting, I think it's to move down. So ECA 8, I just didn't have it on time to print on this document. I only sent it last night. So this is what I'm proposing to the room. So I'm sorry you didn't get to talk about it. In line with the current National Strategy on Education for Sustainable Development, ESD to 2030, that's its actual title, and it's including the additional Department of Children, Equality, Disability, Integration and Youth, because they're in charge of early learning. And the additional wording to continue to engage in meaningful curriculum reform and teacher education to explicitly incorporate teaching and learning on biodiversity in early childhood, primary and post-primary curricula. The continue to is because there are already new subjects coming in line for senior cycle for biodiversity, which I hadn't realised until I had this conversation. So that's where the continue to is coming in, and the teaching and learning is to ensure it's not just written on a curriculum document, that it actually gets implemented. So that's new wording to consider that I'm proposing as a member. So any questions on that I should clarify my suggestion further? Okay, can I have a show of hands in favour? All in favour? Okay, thank you very much for that. Thanks, Cathal. And similarly with ECA 9, I only sent this wording to Cathal last night. Again, changing the name to fully reflect the strategy. So in line with the current National Strategy on Education for Sustainable Development, ESD to 2030, the Department of Further and Higher Education, Research, Innovation and Science, and relevant agencies such as the National Skills Council, the Regional Skills Fora, the Expert Group on Future Skills Needs and SOLAS, etc., should work with further and higher education providers to develop a greater number of easily accessible further and higher education programs, apprenticeship and community-based education related to biodiversity and environmental sciences. Having done some digging, there is an awful lot of agencies in charge of community-based education, apprenticeship, etc. And maybe that's something a Citizens' Assembly on Education needs to sort out, because I imagine there's a lot of gaps if there's that many agencies. But it's to reference them and to suggest that they cooperate with the further and higher education providers. So that's all of the technological universities and universities, etc. And there are already some programs there, so it's to develop a greater number of easily accessible. So any questions or suggestions to add to that? Hilary, on table 9.
Yeah, thanks. It's just making it very complicated looking, Evie. And I know it reflects the ecosystem, if you like, about it. I mean, is there any way of delivering the message without including all those different, is there any overriding?
Unfortunately not, and that's why it's messy.
Isn't it? Yeah, and it just reflects the complexity of the whole thing, yeah.
Yeah.
Streamlining education in the field might be the recommendation.
But that's not within our terms of reference. I mean, you could just say relevant agencies, but then I think people aren't, if they're not specifically named, it mightn't refer to them. Okay. Okay, so Art is suggesting that we could take them out from here and reference them somewhere in the report, like a footnote. Okay. Tim?
Is it on now? Yeah. In a lot of our recommendations, we do list a lot of bodies and agencies and types of people that we want to reference. So this kind of fits in with what we've done in other recommendations. We haven't just said relevant agencies, we say local authorities, inland fisheries, and we list them out. So from that point of view, this fits in with how we've approached it in other ones. That's just comment.
Okay. So maybe all in favour of leaving out listing the agencies here, please raise your hand. Okay. All in favour of this amended wording then to ECA 9, please raise your hand. Okay, thank you, that's carried. Thank you for that. And that is finishing document A. Excellent, thank you. Well done, everybody. Yes, you can have a round of applause. Super. So this is wonderful. We are on track, but now we get to the fun stuff where all the details are in the sectors. So, sorry, Brendan.
Sorry, just in relation to document A, there is one thing. It was AC2. It was to be replaced by AB2 from document B. And I'm just wondering, should we take that now or should we leave until later? So this is on accountability. So it's just...
I think what we'll do, Brendan, is when people have had a chance to consider the AB1 on page 13 of document B, then it'll go back in there. But thank you for flagging that. Okay. So we will begin then with our agriculture recommendations. And we'll start at the top. A1, any amendments to make? Table 4, Anne?
After restore biodiversity, to add any review and change must be cognizant of the need to protect farmers' livelihoods. Yet any review and change must be cognizant of the need to protect farmers' livelihoods.
Okay, thank you, Anne. I'm just trying to think, does that put us in any grey area with that? Sorry, can I have the microphone?
I think it's important to say that anything that is suggested would be cognizant of the need to protect farmers' livelihoods.
And is that all farmers then? All.
Yes. We had that.
Yeah.
We had that discussion
Okay.
here at the table.
Okay, Grant. Any further amendments? Okay. All in favour of including this additional wording, please raise your hand. And all against? Oh, we're going to have to stand up. So all those in favour of including this additional wording, please stand up. Thank you. You can sit down. And all those against including this wording? It's more than 25, so unfortunately it's not included. Thank you, everybody. Okay. A2, we have a suggested amendment for complete language to have legal obligations to protect biodiversity, genetic resources and water quality in there, and that's to make sure that it's biodiversity in its fullness. Now again, this is something that we will incorporate into the beginning of the document, that it's seed diversity as well as flora and fauna, etc. Jenny or James, can I ask you to speak to this for the completeness of wording, if you don't mind, if we can get a microphone? Thank you.
Yeah, so biodiversity obviously implicitly includes the diversity of species. Within a species, it includes genetic diversity. We thought it was really important from the perspective of food that we call out genetic resources. And it's really, it calls to the heritage of our seeds, you know, the variety of our seeds and how important that is for agriculture. We've just given an example of seeds, but it could be heritage cattle, it could be any other basically resource for food that we specifically call out genetic diversity. You know, it's one thing having 10 different varieties of, or species, but 10 different varieties of wheat or corn is really important. So it's just basically an emphasis on what biodiversity is in terms of the genetics for food.
And does it include the wild goats? Because that's the thing that's coming to mind for me with
yeah,
the video.
Anything which is, I suppose, inherently Irish. So I'm thinking of potatoes, all the different varieties of potatoes that would grow in specific parts of Ireland, that's part of our heritage, our genetic resources, and calling that biodiversity out, agricultural diversity for in this particular recommendation.
Thanks, Jenny. Okay, so all in favour of including this additional wording, please raise your hand. Thank you. That's great. A3. Any amendments? Okay, A4. A5. A5. We've got table 9 and table 3. Thank you.
In relation to A5, the second paragraph reads, all biodiversity incentives for farmers shall be results-based over the whole farm, with farmers who protect and enhance biodiversity rewarded and paid for the ecosystem service they contribute. We're suggesting the words protect is taken out because basically there's sort of a basic moral obligation to protect biodiversity, and there's a lot of legislation, water management, nitrates directives, etc., which obliges people at the moment to protect. So it's not necessary to be paid for. So we just suggest it should read, with farmers who enhance biodiversity rewarded. So just basically take out that. It's a bit overkill, we think.
Okay, thank you, Brendan. We'll come back to that now in a second. We'll take the wording from table 3 and then we'll go to table 6.
Yeah, we just wanted to remove rewarded, and because we think they should just be paid. I think it leaves it a little bit ambiguous that it could be like a badge they get or something, but it's money.
Thank you, good point. A badge for biodiversity. That could catch on. Dan, table 6.
Sorry, just to clarify something, we voted on all these the last weekend. All the agriculture ones, we discussed wordings and voted on them already. We're kind of going back over and doing that again, are we?
Yeah, because there were suggestions made for additional recommendations in here, and then in the completeness of the document to amend the wording. So it's open for discussion here today.
We voted on them, and the people that aren't here today voted on them the last time as well. And are we not just discussing the changes today? Is that not what we're supposed to be doing?
Well, it's amendments to all wording. That's what we're doing now.
But we've discussed the amendments to the wording for the agriculture section already and voted on them. No?
We did, but in completeness. It's like when you're taking this as a full set, to my mind, it now allows us to consider it in more detail again. We've got a little bit more time to reflect on it. So there are additional elements that we can consider with it now.
It just seems like we're opening the floor to stuff that we've already agreed and voted on the last weekend.
Yeah, well, if that's what you prefer, Dan, we can just look at the amendments now.
What does the room want to do?
I'll put it to the room, yeah. So I'm not going to let this open for a big debate and discussion. We'll keep on time. All those in favour of just accepting the wording of all of the other agriculture recommendations as are and just focusing on A8, A12 and A18, please raise your hand. Okay. That requires not to go back on A5. Okay, Grant. That's the majority of the room. A8 then. Organic farming should be at the heart of the transition to sustainable food systems. The state must further subsidise and incentivise organic farming and locally grown produce. Sufficient resources must be deployed to support an ambitious implementation of Ireland's strategy for the development of the organic sector for the period 2019 to 2025 to ensure a more supportive environment for the development of organic food and farming and for subsequent policies relating to the medium to long-term development of the sector. Any amendments to that wording? A8. So we've got table 9 and table 1. And table 4.
The table has decided to delete the first line and keep the second one. And the reason behind this organic, it's saying that the other current food system is unsustainable.
Okay, thank you, Kenneth. We'll discuss that in a moment. Jean, table 1.
Is this working? Yeah, organic is, what is organic? There are different societies and there's no set standard. But the farmer who was here previously for organic, if you listen back, he very specifically said they don't use any synthetic fertilizer. Now, he didn't say it, but the implication is, and I know they use extractive fertilizer. So in other words, their system allows fertilizer that's dug out of the ground, like out quarried, but it doesn't allow fertilizer that's manufactured, say, from the gas process. And, you know, what is the difference to the food we eat? There's none. So organic is very much a sectoral thing. So I don't think it should be promoted ahead of the regular food, you know, farming that sustains us. So again, like this table, just like to remove the first section of A8.
Okay, thank you, Jean. So we'll discuss that and vote on that in a moment. And Sheila, it's the same. Okay, so all in favour of removing this first line from this recommendation, please raise your hand. Okay, that's carried. Thank you, everybody. All in favour of including that additional line at the end and for subsequent policies relating to the medium to long-term development of the sector, all in favour, please raise your hand. Thank you, everyone. That's wonderful. Okay, A12. Any amendments or suggestions to this? The Green Cert must be adapted by increasing the proportion of credits for sustainable farming. Modules should include the identification and management of nature biodiversity features on farmland, combining latest scientific information and traditional knowledge, recognising and preserving skills built by generations of farmers. All those in favour of including that language, please raise your hand. Wonderful, thank you. And A18. The state must cease applying for nitrogen derogations. Hands up. So 6, 10, 9, 3, 1. Okay. I thought we'd have to discuss this. So wherever the microphone goes to first. Okay. Yeah, no, thank you.
Yeah, we've proposed complete new wording. So the state must reevaluate the application of nitrate derogations for a more targeted approach, which would replace the current blanket application, which affects water quality in parts of the country that... Sorry. Yeah, sorry, I'll just start again. The state must reevaluate the application of nitrate derogations for a more targeted approach, which would replace the current blanket application, which affects water quality in parts of the country that do not have the capacity to withstand high levels of nitrates and phosphorus due to soil types.
Okay, Louise, we might ask you to give that wording to Cathal. Okay, and thank you. While we're doing that, we'll go to table 10. Okay, thank you. Table 6.
Hi, Avine, table 6, yeah. I think we need further information on this because I feel that a lot of the Assembly are not aware what nitrogen derogation is. So I think maybe one of the EAG might give us some information on this just to enlighten the Assembly. Yeah.
Thanks, Mary. I might take all of the amendments first and then we'll go to James. So table 4 and table 1 also had suggestions on this.
Yeah, we just wanted to remove it entirely for 2 reasons. One, most people don't understand enough about it to really make a recommendation like this. And number 2, we're not sure of the impacts of it. Like if this happened, what would be the impact on, say, food production in Ireland? Okay,
thank you, Jean. And table 4, was there a hand up here? Sorry, there wasn't. Kenneth, I think you're responding rather than amending. Yeah, I'm going to give it to James to... Okay, so with Mary's request, I'm going to go to James at the back of the room, please.
So the nitrates derogation is what the Irish state applies to Europe on the basis of the nitrates directive. So the nitrates directive states a maximum organic nitrogen stocking rate on farms of 170 kilograms of nitrogen. If we take in the past 1 dairy cow is equal to 85 kg of nitrogen, it was sort of 2 dairy cows to the hectare. In many parts of the country, there are farmers that are operating above that intensity, so we have to apply to permission to Europe to operate at up to 3 cows to the hectare. So that's what the nitrates derogation rules are. When Europe grant that derogation, the state also has to put in place a nitrates action plan. So these are additional rules that the farmers that apply for the nitrates derogation have to apply to in terms of nutrient management, increased application of buffer zones along by rivers to ensure the risk of this higher application of nitrogen on the fields does not end up in the water. That nitrates derogation and the continued granting of that nitrates derogation to the country is dependent on the water quality in our country improving. Our water quality during the application of the nitrates derogation has been declining, so we're at risk of losing this nitrates derogation anyways. Also, the banding of what a dairy cow is has increased from 85 to different bands related to the production capacity of the cow. So some of it now is up to 100 kg of nitrogen. So that reduces the amount of maximum number of cows you can have on a hectare. That's already driving some farmers under nitrates derogation to lease or purchase more land around their farms, which puts pressure on the land available for arable production or increases in arable production as well. Also, the overall income of the farm is very dependent on the quantities of production. So if you reduce under regulations the maximum they can produce, there is reports out there in the last number of weeks taking this into account that it will reduce farmers' income if you actually if you actually go along of getting rid of the nitrates derogation. Now, 19 member states don't have a nitrates derogation, and a lot of member states have pushed for this, but it's a unique characteristic that we are very much a livestock-based sector. Many of the other countries have a higher proportion of arable production, so they don't necessarily need the nitrates derogation for their system to operate at higher intensities in the arable system, for example. So I hope that's not too complicated, but essentially
I'm not sure.
But it is a complicated thing. That is the thing. It impacts, this nitrates derogation impacts on the highest intensities of farms, how they operate. It impacts on their economic capacity, but we do have a water quality issue in these areas. And I think in my mind, the question is, we apply that nitrates derogation rules across the whole country. Should we have a more spatial targeted approach to that?
Okay, thank you, James. Now, Kenneth had his hand up first and then Mary. Is that okay? Kenneth, do you still want to speak? Oh, James answered your question. Thank you. Or he said what you were going to say. Okay. Can we give the microphone to Mary? Thanks, Kenneth.
I was just listening to James there and going, I do this sort of stuff and that's bloody complicated for everybody to listen to. In which case, it might be something to think about whether you want to have a recommendation that does something along the lines of review the application for and of nitrates derogations. And that kind of pushes the buck a little bit and says this is an important issue, but we don't necessarily know enough to make a very precise recommendation. So review the application for and of nitrates derogations.
Would anyone like to suggest that wording? Yeah, table 1. Thank you, Mary.
Yeah, it seems to me that A2 covers everything we're talking about without getting into the complication of technical data that we're not fully aware of. And that if we look at A2, you'll find that it has a general coverage in the whole thing, and we really shouldn't be getting into the particular nitrates.
Thank you.
Issue, right?
Thanks for that, Patrick. And I'm going to ask the opinion of the room on that, and that's from table 1. Do we know enough about this to make a recommendation on it as is? Can I just get a feeling from the room? Well, who is happy to include a recommendation on this? Okay. If we included something... No, so that means the majority of the room aren't happy to include a recommendation on this. So we leave A18 out of it. Okay. We have to recognise the limitations of our work. We don't have time to discuss absolutely everything that's going to be related to biodiversity and agriculture. We've done a reasonably good job, I think, with the set we have there. So A18 is not making it in. Sorry, Dan? Sorry, we'll wait till the microphone gets to you.
If there's a vote on whether people want to include or not include, there's probably a lot of don't knows as well, so do the include or not include.
Fair enough, thank you for that, Dan. And Kenneth had his hand up as well.
I thought you made a recommendation on the last one, and it doesn't seem to be including about stocking rates.
Stocking rates.
About, yeah, you said you were going to, I think it was A19 or something. Seemed to have got appropriate.
Oh, on the previous document, is it?
Yes. When we were discussing it, it doesn't seem to be here.
I think it's now been amalgamated into another one. That's where the numbering will be different on that, Kenneth. I can come down and we'll double check that in the next discussion session. Okay, so back to A18, and not looking at any wording in particular right now. All those in favour of including a recommendation on this, you raised your hand. All those who don't know or are not sure about this but would like to actually discuss one of these three wordings, please raise your hand. Okay.
So I think maybe is the question, all those who don't think we should have a recommendation on nitrates because we don't know enough, would you raise your hand? Okay. Yes.
Dan, are you happy with that? Okay, grant. So A18 is not making it in. Thank you, everyone. Freshwater. Now, we are going through this one by one because we haven't looked at this before. So, F1. Any amendments to wording with F1? Table 6. Sorry, is there table 6? Yeah.
So the table wants to change the wording from step change to requires immediate action.
Thank you for that. Any other suggestions for this? Okay. All those in favour of changing step change to immediate action, please raise your hand. Great, that's carried. Thank you. F2. Any amendments to make? F3. We have to, it's a vote on greatly improved. And that's from proposals that came in. And we have a table 11, please.
Thank you. Hi. We just wanted the wording change from greatly to drastically improved.
Drastically improved?
Yeah.
Okay, all those in favour of changing greatly to drastically, please raise your hand. And that's not carried. All those against? Or sorry. And now all those in favour of including greatly, please raise your hand. Okay, thank you very much. F4. Any amendments to what's there? Okay, all those in favour of including this additional wording. Oh, sorry. Liam, on table 2.
Oh, sorry. Should get up more often. The suggestion of this table, riparian buffer zones related to agriculture, forestry, industry and extractive processes and urban development must be expanded and taken into account local conditions to prevent nutrient and sediment runoff. Schemes must, underlined, be put in place to incentivise landowners to protect waterways with incremental subsidies depending on the width and quality of buffer zones.
Thank you, Liam. So it's a suggestion to change that should to a must. All those in favour, please raise your hand. Okay, that is carried. Thank you very much. F5. And comments from table 9 and table 6 and table 4.
We just wanted to add industries to F5. The Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine, Inland Fisheries, Industry, Farmers, Private Landowners, etc.
Thanks, Edvard. So we'll take a vote on that in a second. Table 6, then 4 and then 1.
Yeah, we just wanted to add community groups to the end of that before, etc.
Okay, thank you. Table 4.
Yeah, we just wanted to consider adding at the very end of that, furthermore, local authorities must maintain the highest standards of riparian zones along the rivers and their areas to act as linking corridors between urban and rural habitats.
Keith, thank you. If we can take that wording. Okay, and Patrick on table 1.
Yeah, my understanding is that the local authorities aren't responsible for the rivers or waterways, and we need to be careful on this. It's sometimes divided between Irish Waterways, Irish Water, various other bodies, but my understanding is local authorities are not responsible, therefore we can't ask in this, I think, for local authorities to be responsible when there are other bodies involved.
Thanks, Patrick. Is your suggestion to leave it out, Patrick, then, or do you have a suggestion to make on it?
No, I'm just flagging that we shouldn't be asking a body to be responsible when they're not responsible.
Yeah.
You know, it's not wise.
Okay, thank you. And we'll go to Micheál, please, at the back of the room.
Just 2 comments on that. First of all, Patrick, local authorities are responsible, actually, as listed public bodies under the regulations for the Water Framework Directive. So they're not solely responsible. That's the complicated thing. And there's a lot of discussion in the room today about all the different bodies that are responsible. But I think it does make sense in the way it's written there that they're held responsible because they already are under the law, but to work with these other agencies. And I also think that the addition of industry and community groups makes sense. But just then a comment on the second part of it, which was the suggestion that was made that local authorities must maintain. That's problematic because, you know, I guess Patrick has said, you know, they're not the only people responsible, but specifically because local authorities on their own don't own the riparian zone. So the only way that the second part of it would make sense if it were added local authorities and landowners.
Thank you for that, Micheál. Dan, you had your hand up, sorry. On table 6, thank you.
Just would a better wording be local and other relevant authorities? Would that cover it?
For the first section.
Yeah. The first section, so local and other relevant authorities. So that kind of covers the bit that is controlled by the local authorities and the bits that aren't. Somebody else is in control of them.
Okay.
Or responsible for them.
Okay, and we might actually do that on part 2 as well, Cahill, local authorities and landowners. And now we have to vote. Okay.
Just in terms of the second part, I'd be kind of tempted to leave out the explanation for why, because we could be explaining all the recommendations, the ecological reasons for that. So, furthermore, local authorities and landowners must maintain the highest standard riparian zones along the rivers in their areas, full stop. We don't have to explain why, because that's part of the workings of the Assembly. If we do that, we could end up doing that the whole time. This is why we're having trees, this is why we're looking after the sea, and, you know, so I would just suggest maybe consider not including that part, just for the sake of the document.
Okay, we'll vote on all this now. So I'm just going to take the addition of, oh, sorry, Brendan, table 8.
think we're probably on the same wavelength. I think it should just simply be changed to local authorities and landowners, as suggested by the eminent expert, which makes sense.
Thank you, Brendan. Yeah, table 5.
Could we combine the two by saying at the start of the first one, other relevant authorities must be held responsible for improving and maintaining the conditions of rivers and riparian zones?
That sounds very sensible.
Maybe.
So then, that requires, Tony, that we say local and other relevant authorities and landowners at the top. But if we're taking out the bottom.
Oh, yeah.
It's getting messy now. Yeah, okay. Yeah, okay. Okay, sorry. Now, I'm just keeping track of hands, because did someone over here have their hand up as well? Is Hillary? Okay, grand. So back to table 4 then, please.
Yeah, Tim, I take your point, but I think the key thing that we're trying to get across here is actually to identify the need for linking between urban and rural habitats. I think that's the key thing for us, if the Assembly are into it, you know.
Okay, I'm just going to actually read this whole thing from start to finish and see how we go with that. Hillary, do you have a comment on the wording?
A separate thing to this point. I think that issue of the linking corridors between urban and rural, I think it has to be voted on separately to this.
Yes, it will be, yeah. So, local and other relevant authorities must be held responsible for maintaining and improving the conditions of rivers in their areas, working with each other, state agencies such as OPW, Quilcha, the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine, inland fisheries, industry, farmers, private landowners, community groups, etc. Furthermore, local authorities and landowners must maintain the highest standards to riparian zones along the rivers in their areas, potentially to act as corridors between urban and rural habitats. Okay. I'm going to start with the vote of including industry, farmers and community groups. I think it's just, yeah, inland fisheries, industry, farmers and community groups. All those in favour of listing those inclusions in this sentence, please raise your hand. Thank you. The initial wording now, including and other relevant authorities, including maintaining and improving, and including each other. I think we can take it that they make sense. All in favour, please raise your hand. Okay, thank you. Now, including, furthermore, local authorities and landowners must maintain the highest standards to riparian zones along the rivers in their areas. Just that part on its own. All in favour of including that within this recommendation, please raise your hand. And all those against including this within this overall recommendation, please raise your hand. I think that's a majority.
I think it's a majority.
Yeah.
No,
Well, we can count it.
Count?
Pardon me?
Do you want to count?
Can I just do it again? All those in favour of including this in this recommendation, please raise your hand. Okay, we have to count. Yeah. Sorry, would you mind standing up? Sorry, Mary? We're voting on, furthermore, local authorities and landowners must maintain the highest standards to riparian zones along the rivers in their areas. We're voting on including just that particular wording right now in this recommendation. 31. Okay, thank you. You can sit down. And all those against including this additional line in this recommendation, please raise your hand, or please stand up. Yeah, okay, so it's being included. Thank you everyone for that. Now that it's being included, okay, Keith, you're retracting that second part of the line. You're happy not to include it? You're not retracting it, okay. But it's okay not to include it?
In the text.
It can be in the text. Okay. Well, then we don't need to vote on it if that amendment is not being proposed. So now we have... Okay, yeah, Grant, we've discussed it. So all those in favour of including this extra section to act as linking corridors between urban and rural habitats, please raise your hand. Okay. And all those against, just for completion. Okay, so it's not going in, but thank you everybody for that. Completed. That took some work. Good work. F6. It is imperative that penalties for polluting fresh water... Sorry, I don't need to read them all. No. Are there any amendments to the wording on that? No? Okay, Grant. F7. Table 8. Nadine?
Our table proposed changing it to farmers must have access to continuous training.
Thank you, Nadine. So farmers must have access to continuous training in actions and land management practices. Okay. All in favour of this amended wording? Please raise your hand. And all those against, please raise your hand. Okay, it's carried. The new wording is carried. Thank you. Sorry, Kenneth. Okay, sorry, I should have come to you before this then, sorry.
Farmers must have access to continuous training and up-to-date research.
Okay. So to add to this amendment and up-to-date research. Thank you, Kenneth. All those in favour of including this and up-to-date research? Thank you for raising your hand. Thank you, that's passed. Okay, any amendments to F8? Table 4, okay.
Sorry, it's just an addition at the end. So F8, the current timelines and targets are inadequate. We are proposing that we add in, and this action needs to be prioritised immediately.
If we say that action needs to be prioritised immediately, does it mean all of the others don't?
Well, I mean, the running of untreated sewage into water is completely unacceptable. And in fact, we'd evoke that this should become F1 as opposed to F8 on the freshwater recommendations.
We already have the unacceptable discharge. Okay. I'll take those two issues separately. Any other amendments to F8 right now? Okay. All those in favour of including this additional language, please raise your hand. Okay. That's not carried. All those in favour of moving this higher on the list of recommendations, please raise your hand. And all those against? Okay, so we will move it up in the recommendations. Can you make a note of that, Tim?
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, F9. F10. F11. Table 4.
Sorry, I'm not going to be like this all day.
That's fine, Keith. You're speaking on behalf of your table. It's okay.
Yeah, F11. Again, it was just to add in at the end. Nature-based solutions must be included in state and community programs to tackle flood management, and we're proposing that we add in and should include whole of catchment area hydromorphology planning and restoration.
Can we get the wording to Cahill, please, on that?
Yeah.
Do you want to speak to it for a minute, Keith, while we're seeing it up there? Do you want to speak to the reasoning behind it?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of in terms of the way things are currently done, we're trying to remediate in terms of floodplains. And I think in terms of what we heard in terms of the catchment area approach, if we can move back up towards the sources and introduce better planning and restoration of those areas before we hit community areas, do we stand a better chance of actually reducing flood management?
Okay, thank you for that. Hilary, is there a question on that?
No, just a comment. So I see that F11 and F12 are beginning to merge there a bit. So I propose, in the interest we have so many recommendations, that if the hydromorphology planning is in F11, that we should consider rewording it to take in F12.
I think they're separate because F11's emphasis is on nature-based solutions to tackle flood management. And F12 is an analysis and survey of a national hydromorphology plan. So I don't think they should be, I think they weren't separate actions. Yeah, we could swap them. So let's take all this separately now. First of all, including the wording, and should include whole catchment area hydromorphology planning and restoration. All those in favour of including this wording in F11, please raise your hand. Okay, that's the majority of the room. Thank you. All those in favour of amalgamating F12 and F11, please raise your hand. Okay. And those in favour of switching the order of F12 and F11, please raise your hand. And okay, so that's not carried. Okay. Thank you. F12. Any amendments? F13. F14. Table 4, Sheila.
We just have a slight amendment to the second sentence. New construction regulations must be developed to limit the permissible area of soil sealing around all new buildings and developments. So taking out around the base. So around all new buildings and developments.
Thank you, table 4. So just waiting. Okay. Dan, to comment on that, yeah. Table 6.
Just when you're saying all new buildings, it could also be applied to existing buildings that are going for redevelopment. So does new fit in there? So it'd be part of the planning process. So you don't just get planning for new buildings, you get them for existing buildings that have been altered as well. Does that make sense?
Sorry. New construction regulations must be developed to limit the permissible area of soil sealing around all buildings and developments. Is that the suggestion?
The wording isn't quite right, but if you just say new buildings, then it's only new construction, new buildings that don't currently exist. But if you put in something to include it in the planning process for all buildings that have been either constructed from new or amended.
Okay, sorry. So I'm just trying
to know the wording explicitly.
Yeah. We can work on that now, maybe a little bit. So, new construction regulations must be developed to limit the permissible area of soil sealing around.
And is it more of a planning thing rather than a construction regulation? Construction regulations tend to be about how you build a building and what you use, whereas planning is about the use of the space.
So, new planning regulations, is that the proposal,
it might,
Dan? Okay.
It might work better.
Unfortunately, we don't have our planners with us today.
Do we have a planning expert in the room over at table 1 by any chance?
Yeah, sorry, I am a construction lawyer though.
Excellent.
And I do think he's right that it should be planning regulations, and also generally development would be interpreted as any kind of redevelopment, especially under planning legislation. So yeah, I think you're dead right.
I love the scope of this room. Thank you. So could you suggest specific wording then that we might use on this, Fiona?
Yeah, so new planning regulations must be developed to limit the... Sorry, I don't know enough about soil sealing, really. I just know that I don't think it would be a construction regulation. New planning regulations must be developed to limit the permissible area of soil sealing around all buildings and developments. I think that would capture your redevelopment point if under the remit of the planning regulations.
Could you just say all developments, because it's not just buildings. So if you're putting in a car park for a football field, you're seeding soil there, so that needs to be considered. So it's not just buildings, it's all developments.
Yeah, true. Sometimes it's important to capture new buildings as well, because there are... maybe new regulations. Actually, sorry, I'm second guessing myself, but there can be things that regulate what can happen on new buildings in the construction regulations, and they can be passed quite easily. So, new regulations. Yeah.
Okay.
Does that work?
Makes sense, yeah.
Great. That is good collective drafting. Well done. So now we will vote on, actually what we're voting on is the removal of construction from the second sentence in F14. So all those in favour of the removal of the word construction, please raise your hand. Okay, thank you. And then the removal of around the base of, oh, please raise your hand. Okay, that's passed, great. And including other developments, please raise your hand, just for completeness. Excellent. So now we have a far better recommendation there. Well done, everyone. And we're moving on to marine coastal. Pardon me, Kenneth, sorry? Oh, no, we're voting on the wording.
Yeah, but we didn't vote on the new. We didn't vote on the new word. You only said construction, but you never voted on the new word.
Okay, so all those in favour of including this recommendation, is that what you mean, Kenneth? Sorry.
The word regulations.
But regulations was already in there. It's just removing construction.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. No, it's good to check the homework, but yeah, that was already in the sentence. Thank you. Keith? Microphone.
Just want to make sure that we haven't left it open to be retrospective. Do you know what I mean? We're not referring to new buildings and new developments. Yeah, new regulations, but that's referring to the regulations as opposed to the development. So new regulations. So, yeah, I just don't want to be retrospective with it.
Okay, so to include new buildings? Okay, so if we can include new buildings there, Cathal? Okay. All those in favour of including this new, please raise your hand. Okay, that's carried. Okay, thank you, everyone. Mary, sorry, at the back of the room.
Sorry, this is just more pointing out that you've just gone and voted exactly against what someone was suggesting a minute ago about the renovations. So if you, but I do get entirely what was just said about this could catch somebody who had a house built 20 years ago, doesn't want to do anything to the house, and suddenly they're being told you must seal the soil, or not seal the soil rather, and do something. But you could have something like all new buildings and developments and significant renovations or something like that, so that if you are doing a massive overhaul of your building, that then the regulations would apply. I don't mind, I'm just pointing out that whoever was suggesting it a minute ago, it does go against what they were suggesting.
Dan, will you get the microphone to you?
On that point, there is a recognition in the building regulations that significant development or changes to a building over 25% of the floor area come under different regulation at times to buildings that are going what they call minor alterations. So you don't necessarily put a figure on it, but to differentiate between the two. So if somebody's going painting their house, they don't have to go and put in a new car park. But if somebody is extending a large office building by more than 25% of the floor area, then they have to look at other things as well, that kind of thing.
So what are you suggesting in terms of the wording here?
What Mary said.
To include significant renovations?
Yeah,
okay.
Put a word like that on it, but not a figure.
Okay, and Keith?
Sorry, I'll offer another wording on that just to give a little bit more clarity. So we say all new buildings and other developments subject to planning.
Great. So new regulations must be developed to limit the permissible area of soil sealing around all new buildings and other developments subject to planning. That are subject to planning? Which are subject to planning. Okay. Soil sealing poses a threat. I just want to make sure that now makes sense. Okay, sorry. Table 10.
Hi, sorry. Would it be simpler if it was just, say, the second sentence there was new planning regulations must be developed to limit the permissible soil area?
And we're now going round in circles because we decided to not make it specific to planning or construction.
Okay, yeah.
Because it could fall under either.
Okay.
But it's...
Yeah, so I suppose if the planning is in it, then it covers it, yeah.
And the subject to planning is to get anything that might be undergoing a significant renovation. Yeah, okay. So now, all those in favour of including this new wording, which are subject to planning, in this recommendation, please raise your hand. Okay, thank you, that's passed. Now we'll move on to Marine, MC1. Any amendments? It is coffee time, we'll get through this quick. Don't worry, table one. That's why I have them up in the front. Okay, MC2. Any amendments? MC3, any amendments? MC4? MC5, obviously did a great job drafting these ones. MC6? Yeah, table 11.
We propose that new wording. As a matter of urgency, the state must phase out all single-use plastics, including the banning of plastic pre-packaging of fruit, vegetables, meat and fish. We must prioritise multi-use returnable glass bottles or jars for food and beverages.
Thank you. We'll take that wording up to Cathal if that's okay. Kenneth, table 9.
Just when we get the word, I think there could be a food safety issue. We have to be careful, especially with raw meat.
Thank you, Kenneth. Dan on table 6.
Unfortunately, we can't get rid of all single-use plastics because they're used widely in medical settings and things like that. So to say that would be to say that we can get rid of medical devices that can't be reused.
Okay, thank you, Dan. I'm just waiting now for the full wording to go in there. And table 6, Luke.
Thank you. Yeah. I'm not sure if this really applies, but just with the single-use plastics, they're, as far as I'm aware, a byproduct of the petrochemical industry. So they're going to come about anyway, and we're going to use them. It's what we do with them afterwards. I think we should try and move away from landfills and maybe move towards incineration as an option.
Okay, now we're going beyond our terms of reference.
I know it's going off, but
So,
just something to keep in mind.
Listen, it's a delicate area because we do know that pollution is a cause of biodiversity loss. However, we can't go outside the bounds to tell the state how to fix pollution without the direct link here. So with all of those comments in mind, so Dan has suggested phasing out isn't actually a practical thing that we can do because that has implications in other spaces. And Kenneth has also suggested that it's potentially not possible to ban the pre-packaging because some foods will need it. I'll give the microphone to Mary now. Yeah.
Sorry, my voice is really going in. You could just add wherever possible or wherever possible and safe to do so. So just put in a caveat at the end of it, which would address the ones to do with medical and health and safety issues. If you're adding the thing, it could be wherever
or
possible.
we could keep the text as we have it at the top. Okay, so there's a few things to vote on now. And I'm presuming from table 11, did you still want to include, or you didn't want to include, to minimise pollution within its waters and along its shores? Did you want to include that in the wording as well? It can be, okay. So I'm going to take this step by step. As a matter of urgency, are people happy to include as a matter of urgency in this recommendation? Please raise your hand. Okay, that's passed. Great, thank you. Now, instead of having the state must increase actions and legislation to considerably reduce single-use plastics and microplastics, instead of that, All those in favour of including the state must phase out single-use plastics, including the banning of plastic pre-packaging of fruit, vegetables, meat and fish, wherever possible and safe to do so. All those in favour of including this wording instead, please raise your hand. Okay. It does in that regard, but there's not a majority of people who are willing to include this additional sentence anyway, so that comment, we don't need it. So then, we go back to our initial wording. Increase actions legislation to considerably reduce single-use plastics and microplastics. That's staying. Are you happy to include to minimise pollution within its shores and along its shores? All those in favour of including that specific wording, please raise your hand. Okay, that's a majority of room, thank you. Now, we must prioritise multi-use returnable glass bottles for food and beverages. This is already being done, and I argue here we're straying into pollution that isn't specific to the marine, which is what we're under in this section. So with that in mind, I'm not sure it fits here, but we'll take a vote. So all those in favour of including this line about returnable glass bottles for food and beverages, please raise your hand. Okay, so that's not going to be included. Thank you, everybody. So, Cathal, if we can see the final wording there now. Okay. Thank you, everyone. MC7. So, Yves, table 4.
So table 4 just wants to add to the end of MC7 that all developments in MC7 must fully consider local biodiversity, must not negatively impact biodiversity, and must enhance biodiversity wherever possible.
Now, I think we've covered that.
I actually believe this is in energy. Hold on a second. Tim.
Yes, it is in energy. I think it's the only clause in energy, document A, but I just think there should be a mention of that within MC7, just in regards to, the development of wind farms in the sea does have a significant impact on both biodiversity and also marine biodiversity. So that's just the reasoning behind that.
So just, Yves, if you look at document A, page 11, the energy recommendation, we have there, prioritise the shift to all forms of renewable energy to achieve decarbonisation while ensuring that these developments undertake full consideration of local biodiversity, do not negatively impact biodiversity, and enhance biodiversity wherever possible. So it's there, and what we can do is make a reference to say, see recommendation, blah. See, is that acceptable? Okay. And we can cross-reference. Okay, are you happy with that? Thank you. So with that in mind then, is there any other amendments to MC7? Are you happy to keep MC7 as it is? Yeah, okay, great, that's fine. There's no other amendments to wording in MC7. Okay, and MC8. Is there a comment there, sorry? No, great. Coffee time. All these will be on the ballot. Thank you everybody for your patience and your work.